Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are, of course, your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we are back for another summer transfer window update. Yes, there isn't any tumbleweed in the background before you ask me. Helping me break down this show, we've got a wonderful returning journalist alongside us, and Jamie Brown's back from Daily Hotspur. Jay, how are you? Love to be back alongside us.
I'm all good, Ricky. Obviously, apart from the disappointment of Spurs' transfer window so far, I'm sure we will spring into action at some stage. But yeah, all good. Thank you, Ricky. And yeah, really looking forward to this show tonight. Obviously, got another fantastic journalist on. So yeah, really looking forward to it.
Yeah, got to say, always great we have this man back. We've had him over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Always a pleasure to welcome him back to the show. We grab him twice in a season, once in January, once in the summer. We never quite know when that time is going to be in January and in the summer, and not sure what Tottenham have done to point on that business. It's fair to say that the window is open. Spurs are yet to get going, so we'll find out more what Spurs are hoping to do, hopefully throughout this transfer window. We're joined by the brilliant Sami Mokbel, BBC. Sami Mokbel now. Sam, how are you? Love to be back alongside us here.
Hello, boys. How are you doing?
Not bad. Yourself? You all good?
Yeah, all good, mate. It's always a pleasure to come on with you guys, mate. You've got a great show, and no, thank you for having me on again.
Bless you, mate. Always a pleasure, and thank you so much. Because I say at the moment, look, we do know it's been a quietish start to the window for Tottenham, where I think there was maybe an expectancy that more would have been done at this stage. But we have to remind ourselves, of course, that Thomas Frank, with all due respect, has only been through the door really over the last 3.5 weeks, even less than that, yet to even hold his first formal press conference as a Tottenham Hotspur head coach. So, of course, with that, you would imagine there's some degree of him wanting to maybe analyse what he's got before looking to potentially go into the market, although I know many clubs already made their move. So maybe that's where we'll start in terms of what Tottenham may be looking to do this market, what some other clubs have done, and why there is that feeling out there. Spurs do need to start pretty much very, very soon. Jay, if I can hand over to you to kick us off, that'll be perfect.
Yeah, well, obviously, as Ricky says, a lot of our Premier League rivals have been making plenty of moves. We've seen Chelsea, of course, spending, I think, £100 million on just 2 attackers in the last couple of days. Sounds like they still want more. Of course, Manchester City making some big moves. Reinders coming in. They've got Ryan Cherky, 𝐅𝐸𝐸. So obviously, as I said, plenty of clubs and obviously teams that we'd like to be rivaling, or as Daniel Levy says, we'd like to be challenging for the Premier League title. Do you think with all the business that they're getting done and our lack of business that there should be some sort of concern from Spurs fans?
No, not at the moment. I understand. I understand maybe some of the angst from Tottenham supporters with regards to, oh, we're not doing any business. We're already falling behind. But I think Ricky alluded to it during the intro there. You've got to allow time for at least a bedding in period for the manager. He was only appointed, was it 2.5, maybe 3 weeks ago, right? So, as Ricky rightly pointed out, he's going to want to have a look at this squad, see who's in the building. He will know a lot about those players already. He's been a Premier League manager for 5-6 years, having helped and sort of guided Brentford back into the Premier League rather than back into the Premier League. So that he needs to be afforded, or the club needs to be afforded, a period of time to adapt to that, and then those conversations with Thomas Frank can be had with regards to who he fancies, which players that they've looked at, which players of those that he knows, maybe trying to convince him of 1 or 2 that he's not sure about, and that all takes time. You mentioned Liverpool, you mentioned Chelsea, you mentioned Manchester City there. Yes, they've all done very early business and pretty significant business, but they've had a run up to the summer, whereas I think, and I'm sure a lot of Spurs supporters might disagree, but I think it was pretty well known for a while that Ange Postecoglou wouldn't be in charge of Tottenham ahead of next season. So Tottenham simply haven't had that luxury of being able to build up to a transfer window. They knew they were going to make a change. So a lot of the build-up work towards recruitment and a lot of that is having to be fast-tracked at the moment. That's not to say that they're not prepared for it. They will have their lists, and Johan Lang will have potential targets. I'm sure, obviously, Fabio Paratici, who works for the club at the moment on a consultancy basis, he will have his ins, and they will all be working, and they would have all certainly been working together ahead of the window. But ultimately, the manager needs to have a say in that, right? And Thomas Frank hasn't been in the building for 3 weeks, just over 3 weeks. So allow that period to take shape, and I'm sure there will definitely be signings, and I think there'll be pretty significant signings between now and the end of the transfer window.
Sam, you said one thing there about the collaborative approach there will be from Tottenham. I think what's quite interesting is that we've seen in a number of different situations, different managers, that there's been that kind of term club signings that have been made. We spoke about the influence about maybe what Frank will have behind the scenes in terms of the market and in terms of bringing players to the club. I'd be intrigued to know from you, how much influence do you think he would have had in terms of the players potentially coming in across the summer? Because I would imagine behind the scenes, like you said there, the club had already been succession planning, pre-planning about what the summer would have came. So you'd imagine there was already some players on that list. Is it just a case that with Frank walking through the door, he would be able to add to that list? Would it be a case of, again, we mentioned that word collaborative effort. I'm just intrigued to know, because I think we've seen so far come through the door, Matisse Tel has joined the club on a permanent basis, and Frank's come out publicly and said he's really looking forward to working with the player. Obviously, we know Kevin Danso's move has now become a permanent move as well. Obviously, 𝐁𝐵Ière has left the club on a permanent basis. Luka Vuskovic coming through the door as well this summer. From your understanding, do you think Frank is already going to be given that opportunity to get almost, with all due respect, a couple of statement signings in to really shape this squad in the way he wants to as the manager?
I think so, but I think that was part of the attraction with Thomas Frank. I think it's been well documented, and I've written quite significantly in recent weeks about the synergy between Thomas Frank and Johan Lang. They've got a long existing relationship, and I think they kind of almost sing off the same hymn sheet, really, with regards to the kind of players that they want to recruit. Younger, high energy players. That's the kind of football that Thomas Frank wants to play. So I don't think it's a surprise. It wasn't a surprise that Thomas Frank got the job, particularly because of Johan Lang and their relationship. And I think Johan Lang actually tried to get Thomas Frank into Aston Villa, maybe when Gerrard was being appointed, or maybe it was Emery. I can't recall which appointment it was, but Lang has always wanted to work with Thomas Frank, because I think they view football in a very similar way. So I think moving forward, hopefully, if you're a Tottenham fan, they can reap the benefits of that synergy.
I would just have the point where maybe Jay comes in and asks you about maybe what would change with regards to Vinay Venkatesham coming through the door. I do want to ask you, Sam, about Daniel Levy. Obviously, he's been like the one constant at Tottenham in the last quarter of a century, really. Whilst there hasn't been too many moving pieces in terms of Boardroom level, there's been a bit of a reshuffle at the top, which we'll come on to shortly. But obviously, Daniel Levy has come out with quite a significant, you'd say, statement or significant words over the last month or so, where he is, from his perspective, gone on record to say that he wants the club to be able to not only compete on all four fronts, but he wants the ambition to win the Premier League, to win the Champions League. I just want to know from you, from the outside looking at that, what do you think when you hear those words? With a lot of Tottenham fans out there, I think, really wanting to see the club push forward, push on the back of that Europa League final. And look, it's, again, we're only 5 or so 6 weeks from winning that Europa League. And look, we all had an amazing week, some of us the best week of our lives, by winning that trophy. But I think there's a lot of fans out there that wanted to see the club really significantly after winning that, use that as a springboard. And look, they still can absolutely make this window a success. But I think already, for some, not all, that feeling is already a little bit wearing off because we haven't yet acted in the market. I mean, can you see anything massively changing at Tottenham, Sam, with Daniel Levy still being the chairman at the football club?
Well, massively changing, probably not. No. Do you mean in terms? Do you mean in terms of maybe loosening the purse strings a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everyone is widely known. We've got this
Right.
wages
Yeah.
to revenue ratio at 42%. It does feel that out there, you know, with Tottenham, they are a club that really aren't in a position to spend a highly significant amount on wages. And I think when you look at our overall big signings in the last few years, we're going to have to, I think, significantly break the bank if we are to go and bring in some real top quality players that are
Yeah.
going to really push and enhance the squad on. And don't get me wrong, you can go and buy some really decent players that aren't going to cost you at the level of 80, 90 million, but it just feels where Tottenham are and what they want to hopefully be and what the fans want them to be. We are in the need, I think, of this window, having some real quality, experienced players come through the squad rather than young, budding talent that we're obviously hoping that Thomas Frank would coach, if you see where I'm coming from.
I get what you mean. So in terms of making sort of these block-busting, ready-made, ready-to-go signings that are almost guaranteed, right?
Yep.
That hasn't been that, you know, even like if you even look back to your record signing last year, which was obviously Dominic Solanke, as well as he's done, as well as he did, sorry, last season, and I thought he actually had perhaps not the optimum goal rate you would have wanted, but I think his performances for the team, he was vital to the way that Ange Postecoglou wanted his team to play. Certainly in those latter stages of the Europa League, where I think you were a lot more compact, and so Dominic Solanke holding the ball up wherever he could was crucial, really. But I, if I'm being honest, I don't see Tottenham at the moment going hell for leather and spending 80, 90 million pounds on a player. I just don't think it's in the model. And listen, they spent 60, still, you know, spent 65 last year on Solanke. So a lot of people will say, well, that was 12 months too late, and that was the K money, right? And I understand that. I understand that argument, but I just don't think Tottenham are necessarily in a position at the moment to spend that level of money on one player. I think they have to be a bit more prudent.
I think the other concern with Levy as well at times is when he kind of takes too much control over the footballing decisions as well. I think that, you know, he's appointed some great footballing people at the club, obviously Paratici being one of them, and Langa, and maybe taken too much control on at times. So I think that would be the other frustration from Spurs fans. I think there is maybe an acceptance that we might not spend that money, as we've said, but it's just allowing these people that he's appointed to make the footballing decisions, because as we've seen, we've identified some great targets in the past, and maybe, you know, he's either blocked them for different reasons, maybe for a fee. So I guess that is the other frustration from Spurs fans. But as we said, the other guy who arrived at Spurs just recently was Vinay Venkatesham as the new CEO. Obviously, he did the interview with Daniel Levy, saying that we're going to be completely joined on each decision. Sometimes they might disagree, but that relationship's obviously going to be really interesting. Now, one thing he did do very well down the road at Arsenal was kind of improve their relationship with different clubs, especially the relationship with the supporters. Now, I feel like we've already done that. He's already come in and done that quite quickly at Spurs. We've seen, as I've mentioned on previous shows, when he's built that connection with the fans, where some of the away games in Europe, there was a real try to engage them. We've obviously seen today the Bill Nicholson gates, that real nice touch towards that are going to be installed. So it's just small touches like that. Do you think that this is a good appointment for Spurs and someone who can improve the relations with the supporters and maybe other clubs?
Yeah, no, I do. I think it's a very shrewd appointment. If I'm being honest, I know maybe a lot of Tottenham fans will look at his past and the previous club that he worked for and think, well, what are you doing here? But he did excellent work at Arsenal, and I know, having covered the club Arsenal for a number of years, they were very disappointed to lose him. Commercially and from a business perspective, he is probably one of the shrewdest and best operators in or was when he was at Arsenal in the game in English football. And I think that level of expertise, working for a club who has sort of continuously, I know it's difficult for you guys to hear, but have kind of tried to be there or thereabouts, pushing for the pushing in top 4 spaces and qualifying for the Champions League year in and year out. I think that sort of experience and expertise is invaluable. And Arsenal are absolutely every Arsenal to a point are or have strived to be this to establish this self-sustaining model of sort of financial reliability. So and Venkateshan played a big role in that at Arsenal. So I can see the attraction for Daniel Levy in Venkateshan because he's got a proven track record of doing that at one of the biggest clubs in the country. And yes, while it might, those sort of previous allegiances may irk some supporters, I think Venkateshan will end up being a very, very good appointment. Yeah.
Is he someone that's got good relation with other clubs as well? Do you think that might help? Because we know with Daniel Levy that he has managed to irk a lot of maybe different directors, people in the game. We obviously heard about the famous story with Sir Alex Ferguson and negotiating with him. Do you think that's going to be a big factor as well?
Yeah, no, he's very well liked. He's listen, some of the dealings that I've had with him, he's a very polite, very pleasant bloke, and he's down to earth, and he's very amiable, and he's very likable. And I think that in terms of those negotiations, that will reflect well. He, in his first week, in his first week of the job, that was the week that they were looking to appoint and sort of negotiating to bring Thomas Frank into the building. My understanding of that situation was that he threw himself straight into those negotiations. It wasn't like he twiddled his thumbs and waited for Daniel to take care of business. He's like, well, I'm here now. Let me take control of this situation. And then, a lot of the groundwork towards Thomas Frank's appointment would have been completed beforehand. I think we know that. That's in the public domain. But at the end of the day, he executed that. He executed that deal, or was part of the execution of that deal, and he played his part. And he's thrown himself right into the deep end. And in terms of having good relationships with other clubs, I think time will tell with that. But I think I haven't heard a negative word about him from any of the clubs that have dealt with in Venkateshan. So that kind of bodes well.
Yeah, just on that relationship point there, I mean, I think that probably takes us quite nicely, Sam, to talk about what now appears to be Tottenham's leading target so far in this transfer window, unless you can tell us otherwise. And it does look like it's Mohammed Kudus that is top of Tottenham's wish list at the moment. It's quite interesting when you look back at the fact Tottenham and West Ham, they haven't done business since 2011. So you're going back, 13, 14 years since Scott Parker made that move over to Spurs. I think it's well known, just that rivalry between West Ham and Tottenham. And look, we'd argue, maybe being biased as Tottenham fans, that West Ham fans for that rivalry more than maybe Tottenham fans do. But it's quite an interesting link, this to Kudus, because he's a player that obviously can play on either side of the wings. He's Premier League proven. It does feel that West Ham have got a need to sell him due to looking to ease their own PSR concerns and worries they've got over that situation. I mean, be intriguing to know from you, Sam, is that what you understand as well, that he is currently Spurs' leading target? And from your end, could you maybe just tell us a little bit about how long that interest has been there for?
Yeah, listen, he is, whether he's the leading target, I couldn't sit here and verify that, but I do know he is a leading target. Whether he's the leading target, I don't know that 100%, but that he's certainly a player that they have a very big interest in, and he's a player that they have certainly made, at the very least, an inquiry into West Ham about the conditions of that deal. I've seen some reports about an offer already, or a bid. I can't say I've had those verified, but it depends what you class as a bid, right? It's all semantics. You know, there could have been a conversation between Tottenham and West Ham and said, what if we offered you this amount, would you accept it? You know, does that constitute a bid? In some people's eyes, it does. In others, it doesn't. But what we do know is Mohammed Kudus is of interest to Tottenham, of major interest to Tottenham. But I guess what you guys don't want to hear is, I think there are certainly other clubs. My understanding are that there are at least 6 other top clubs who have an interest in Mohammed Kudus. Chelsea, to my understanding, are certainly one who have got an interest. Whether that interest is as strong as it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, given that they've just signed João Pedro, remains to be seen. But of those 6 clubs that have made an inquiry, I think Chelsea are one of them, but Tottenham are definitely one of those clubs that have made an inquiry. And it will be interesting to see if they can pull off that deal, because as you say, he's got a release clause of £85 million. But it is my understanding that West Ham are open to a negotiation. I'm not saying they definitely would accept a lower fee, but I think they're open to listening to offers, because I think they need to recoup money in order for Graham Potter to go and reinvest into something, into sort of maybe getting some of the players that he deems essential for the way he wants to implement his style next season.
Just on Kudus' stance as well, would that be a move that interests him? Obviously, there is Champions League now at Spurs, so would Kudus?
I think so. Yeah, I think he's quite keen to leave, is my understanding. He wants to play Champions League football, and some of the noises and intelligence I was getting January time was that, building up to the summer, he was looking to join a club who would be playing Champions League. So obviously, as we know, Tottenham can provide that. Chelsea can also provide that next season. So it'll be an interesting race. But as I say, there are other clubs who will be in the mix as well. But as things stand, I think Tottenham may be the club who are most advanced at the moment.
Would that surprise you, Sam, from an outsider looking in, the fact that West Ham and Spurs might do business, given how long ago they both did anything? When I go back to 2011 being Scott Parker, it's 2 clubs that were known really not working together. And what's quite interesting, I read a crazy stat the other day. I think with Arsenal now signing Kepa, I think it now means that they've traded players in 6 of the last 8 windows, which I found absolutely bemusing. It does feel there's almost one rule it is for the kind of Arsenals and the Chelsea of this world than there is for the kind of Tottenhams, because Tottenham don't typically do business with Chelsea, Arsenal, West Ham, maybe we say for very good reason. Does that surprise you, Sam, that there might be relations open back up there with West Ham? And I know there's a lot of West Ham fans that are also quite angry and frustrated that they would even be engaging with Tottenham for what they would arguably say is one of their better players. But I know at the same time for West Ham, when I speak to some of the West Ham fans, they feel that Kudus didn't have a great season last season, but on his day has got the capability of showing some real decent quality.
Personally, I'm not saying I'm right, but I think it's absolutely ludicrous that in the Premier League, which is the richest league in the world, whereas we kind of know in other European leagues, the money isn't as kind of readily available as it is over here in the Premier League.
Yep.
Is when I don't understand why you would absolutely shut down a line of business because of historic and traditional values. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Maybe that's why I'm not a businessman and I'm a journalist, but it just makes it beggars belief to me that if you want to sell a player, if you've decided if you wanted to sell a player, right, and you've only got 2 clubs at the moment who are interested in your player. One is Tottenham, the other one is Chelsea, for example. Why you would absolutely shut that line down because you don't want to do business with Tottenham, or vice versa. It doesn't make any business sense to me. And I get the traditions of the club, I get the values, and I get the sentiments of supporters who just say, well, why would we want to do business with them? They're our biggest rivals. I understand all that. I get all that. But from a business perspective, yeah, I don't think it makes much sense to cut off a line of revenue, possible revenue like that. It just, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Do you think, one final thing for me before Jay comes in and maybe ask you about an alternative to obviously Kudus, do you think by the token fact, Sam, this has obviously got a little bit more room to run? Because it feels like at the moment we've been hearing a few reports that there's a keen interest from Tottenham, but by what you're saying there, by the fact there's a number of clubs there still around, just again, my gut feeling, I haven't got any intel or knowledge on this, and again, Sam, this might be an opinion from you or anything you would know, that I would imagine, and I might be wrong here, I imagine there might be a price for Tottenham and then a different price for some of the other clubs, given that the reluctance, I would imagine, even though you're saying there should be open lines of communication and business for a lot of clubs, and there shouldn't be anyone that should be obviously in any way kind of disabled from. Although I would say Arsenal probably be the only club I think we wouldn't want to be trading with, if I'm going to be honest with you. Do you think there would be a case where there'd be one price for Tottenham and there would be maybe an easier price out there, or a lower price for some of the other respective clubs?
Like a Tottenham tax, you mean?
Yeah, Tottenham tax. A Tottenham tax, yeah. Pretty much a Tottenham tax.
I'm not going to lie. I have heard sentiments to that effect, unverified, of course, because I don't think anyone is ever going to stand that up. But I have heard sort of indications that there may be in inverted commas a Tottenham tax. Again, to me, it's mad. It's madness to me why you would, for example, stick an extra couple of million on a player just because Tottenham are in it. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I think the one scenario that maybe Tottenham should be aware of is if they do the bulk of the negotiating for Mohammed Kudus and eventually get to a point where they agree a fee for Mohammed Kudus. What that then does is it alerts his five other suitors, the 5 other clubs that have made inquiries for him, to the price. They then know the conditions without having been involved in negotiations. So that would be the one scenario if I was Tottenham that I would sort of be cute about and aware of. But equally, Daniel Levy is sort of a very shrewd businessman. He'll be aware of that, and he will. I'm sure he will guard Tottenham and protect Tottenham from that.
So there have been other players in the attacking areas that have been linked as well. Antoine Semenyo was one of them from Bournemouth. Now he's just signed a new contract until I think 2030 maybe. So he's off the table. The other big one, who I'm sure a lot of the listeners want to know about, is Eberechi EZE. Got a release clause at Palace. I think it's around about £60 million. There has been some reports that maybe they might take that in instalments. There is, of course, I think add-ons as well included in that. Now, the other team that have come into the frame is Arsenal. Reports over the last couple of days really ramping up around them, which I'm sure is a big disappointment for many Spurs fans like myself who have wanted this player for a while. We always kind of make the point that he feels like he feels like he is a Spurs player. So a big disappointment. Just in terms of Spurs' interest, have you been surprised by the report suggesting that the Spurs have maybe turned their attention away from EZE?
No, I wasn't surprised by the reports. I was actually led to believe around 10 days ago that perhaps Tottenham's interest, while the interest is genuine, because why wouldn't it be genuine? He's an excellent player, and as you say, he's got all the hallmarks of a Tottenham player, or what we believe the traditions of a Tottenham player should be, right? But yeah, it would sort of at a point last week, I was led to believe that maybe Tottenham's interest wasn't as strong as many of us originally thought it might have been. And I think it's now obviously now emerged that Arsenal, your North London rivals, are looking to, or at the very least, he is a serious contender for their filling a position that they're looking to fill in attacking midfield ahead of next season. So with that in mind, it's even sort of less surprising that Tottenham have perhaps walked away from their interest in EZE right now, because I'm not sure Tottenham really want to go toe to toe with Arsenal for a transfer at the moment, particularly if EZE, or particularly if they believe EZE would prefer a move to Arsenal, just because of the optics of it. It just wouldn't look. Yeah. It wouldn't look particularly good if they were both going for the same player, and it emerges that he goes to the other side of North London. I think Tottenham would be wise to take themselves out of that situation.
I think it's difficult because I think when you hear what's been said in the past, I think EZE was part of Arsenal's academy when he was younger. There's been suggestions that his dream was to play for Arsenal, and then in his last few appearances when he's come to Tottenham, EZE, he seems to always have ripped it up and played ever so well. And there was that, I don't know if you were there, Jay, the feeling at the end of last season where EZE was looking at the camera and a supporter asked him, would you come to Tottenham? And he kind of gave a look as if to say, what are you asking me that for? I mean, it's difficult because I think, do you know what I think, Sam? The last, I would say, 2 or 3 weeks, I mean, it's with all due respect, I don't think anybody from the journalist world has come out and said definitively EZE wants to come to Tottenham. And I mean, with all due respect, but there's been this feeling that there's been a real build-up about some real excitement about EZE becoming a Tottenham player. And in these last few days, because that has seemed to die off to some degree, I feel like Kudus has had some of the backlash of that. I don't think Kudus is a bad player, but I think EZE has shown a lot more consistency to his game in the last 2-3 years, which is why I think if you polled a lot of Tottenham fans out there, I think EZE would be their almost number one winger target. I don't know if you agree on that, Jay. Do you think am I speaking out of turn there, Jay? Would you agree, or do you think am I being unreasonable?
No, for me, for me, EZE would be the number one target. I mean, as I said, he's been a player that we've been linked with since I think it was
QPR days.
It was exactly when he was at QPR, and I mean, he as well. If as I'm sure we'll get onto, Son Heung-min leaves the football club, it's almost a perfect replacement. I don't know whether, Sammy, you feel like he would be the perfect fit for Spurs as well, Eberechi EZE.
I think he would be perfect for the way that if you watch Brentford under Thomas Frank, I think he'd be perfect for that style of football. As I said earlier, or just a minute ago, traditionally he's got all the hallmarks of those Tottenham flair players that you've had in the past. He's quick, he's strong, he's got a beautiful first touch, gets the ball on the half turn, he makes things happen. And I think he's brilliant for Palace, but I think in an even better team surrounded by even better players, I think he would flourish, and I think he would improve massively. And I can see why Tottenham would have an interest in him for sure. But then, sort of as I alluded to, I think maybe Eberechi EZE has other priorities at the moment, and while that is the case, maybe Tottenham are wise to maybe sort of turn their attentions elsewhere.
I think on that point, Sam, good to know from you. Do you have an understanding of the priority areas Tottenham will be looking to try and strengthen across the summer? Do you know if there's any key points that Frank and the staff will be looking at the moment, given that Frank's not even seen the players train yet? Is it difficult to gauge that at this stage, or anything you can tell us?
I think they're looking for. I think in terms of recruitment, what the targets going into the end of last season, when they knew Ange was probably going to go, or was going to go. I think they wanted an experienced central midfielder to supplement what they've already got. I think there is an understanding of the Heung-min Son situation and how there may be necessary to bring in another forward, because I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but I think that might be a situation that evolves over the next 6 weeks. And also potentially just a left back to supply a bit more competition for a doggy that plays that plays at left back. And but the what I was led to believe at the start of the summer was experience this time around would be key, and I think we've actually seen that, haven't we, in some of their targets already. If you look at the players that they've been linked with, or have an interest in, the one that we've spoken about already, Kudus, has got 2 years. Is it 2 years or 3 years of Premier League football behind him? 2 years of Premier League football behind him.
Yep.
Bryan and Mbeumo, who they have an interest in, as big Premier League interest. Eberechi, another, who's got big Premier League interest, experience, rather than interest. So I think that's the route that they will go down. That's not to say they're going to neglect those younger signings, but I think that is just a club policy. But I think that is almost a Premier League wide policy, though, where you go and try and nab the best young players. You've got to do that. But if Tottenham can add some experience to the talented players, young players that they've already got, I think that would help them no end.
Okay, great. Look, before we squeeze in our first break of the show, Sam, just one player you mentioned that we actually haven't asked you about, because there's been, again, some smoke and mirrors around it, and it'd be great to get some insight from you on it as to what you understand through the situation. Well, upon Frank getting the job, there was real strong links to Bryan Mbeumo and the fact that Tottenham would maybe try and prize him away from Brentford. But obviously we know that United have really been the front runners, it feels like, all summer for his signature. And there was a report that came out at the back end of last week that if Mbeumo wasn't to go to Manchester United, then he most likely would end up staying at Brentford, and there wasn't an interest to go to Tottenham. It'd be good to know from your thoughts on that, because I know there's been suggestions that Tottenham actually denied ever putting in a bid for Mbeumo. And I know, look, you're wise around the blocks. There's a number of ways that you can advocate your interest of a player. It'd be great to know from you, from your perspective, if Tottenham's point of reference with Mbeumo went any more further than just interest, if it ever got to anything further than that, because it does feel it's a player that really shone under Thomas Frank, clearly took a great liking to him. They worked together so well at Brentford. Do you just think maybe Frank's arrival at Tottenham came too late down the line to really see any kind of move progress with that?
I think so. I think that may be an element of it, but I maybe I'm sure a lot of football fans will disagree, but I still think Manchester United still have a big pull for players. You're still joining Manchester United. I know you're joining a Manchester United team that are in a deep transition, but the glamour is still there, and it's still certainly an attraction for players. Did they ever make a bid? My understanding is no, they didn't. But again, I could be wrong. But the interest was real. And the interest was certainly genuine, and it was a player. He was a player. He's a player that they like. But what I was led to believe when that interest in Mbeumo from Tottenham started to break was that, there is an interest from Tottenham, but don't be surprised if he goes to Manchester United, because I think that deal is already quite a way down the line. And he's already indicated that if he was to go, there would be if he was to leave Brentford, there is a fair chance that Manchester United would be his priority. So I think Tottenham have been realistic about that process ever since entering it, and again, which is why I think they've looked at other alternatives to Bryan Mbeumo.
Yeah, you mentioned this about potentially left back being an area that Spurs might look for. Before we do go for the break, I'll hand back over to Jamie, because I know there's been a few suggestions of potential left backs that have been of interest. I know there's been one of the last, I'd say in the last 24 hours, that has taken a little bit of a headline. So I'll hand over to you if we can before we go for that first break.
Yeah, just a little bit from social media. It was obviously Paul O'Keefe. A lot of people would know him from socials. He was suggesting that one of the players that Spurs are looking at is Anthony Robinson at Fulham. Very, very good player. I think he was one of the best left backs in the Premier League last year. I mean, for me, it would be an excellent sign. It would be a slightly odd move from him because he's very much first choice at Fulham. I think you look at Udogi's performances last season, I think he still would be the first choice over Robinson if he was to come in. But is this a player that maybe you have an understanding that Spurs like?
Yeah, I think it depends on who you speak to. I have heard that rumor. I've heard it pretty substantially, but if you speak to others, it sounds like I'm hedging my bets here, and I absolutely am hedging my bets here. But I have heard that there is an interest in the player from Tottenham, but I'm just not sure how advanced it is or whether it has sufficient legs to actually come to fruition. But I think if it's the basic question of have Tottenham got an interest in Anthony Robinson, I think the answer to that is yes. Whether that has legs, I'm not sure it has at the moment.
It's hard because you think about it with a doggy. He is obviously, you feel going into next season going to be definitely the left back that will be featuring on a, you'd say, regular level. You'd argue also with Champions League football and trying to compete on all four fronts that you do need someone that's going to be able to come in and offer that competition. And I know that Sam, you said it's one of those areas they'll be looking at. I think it'll be interesting what Tottenham do over the summer. You know, I think, do you get a gauge with Frank? There'll be some players that maybe have thought are completely out of the picture that when Frank comes in, he might quite take a liking to. You know, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? When someone new comes in as a manager, is it pretty much, you think, Sam, clean slate for a lot of the players that maybe were thinking, my future's not here?
Of course, 100%. I think one player who will certainly benefit from Thomas Frank is Brennan Johnson. And obviously, I'm not saying that he was out of the team at all. He was a very important member of the team. But I think his importance to the team will certainly increase. So I think we all know that Brennan Johnson was a player that Brentford tried to sign when Thomas Frank was in charge. Eventually ended up at Tottenham that summer, much to Thomas Frank's disappointment. So I'm sure Thomas Frank will be rubbing his hands together to be able to get to work with Brennan Johnson, who had an excellent goal scoring season last year. So his numbers were great, and I know he took a little bit of flack, didn't he, at the start of the season? But
yeah.
And even at points, I guess towards the end of the season, I think there's still been some criticism that I've seen maybe from on socials about Brennan Johnson. But I think what he will have now, Brennan Johnson, is a manager that will be vastly looking forward to working with him. And I think when you've got that level of respect from your manager, I think it will only sort of serve to contribute to improving his performances.
Yeah, I do agree on that. Look, we're going to squeeze in our first break of the show for our listeners already. We've got over 6,500 that are watching the show live. Thank you so much, as always, for all incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. I'm joined alongside me by Jamie Brown over at the Daily Hotspur, and we're joined by returning Sami Mokbel from the BBC. We know there's a lot of players that are currently also being linked away with a move from Spurs, so we're going to come on to that very, very shortly. But a reminder for you out there, a couple of things, a bit of housekeeping, that we are delighted once again to be back up and nominated for the Football Content Awards 2025. You can help us follow one trophy with another. You can hit the QR code that will enable you to nominate us for the latest award for Best Podcast for what will be 2025, and you can also follow our description for more on that. We're also delighted to continue our long-term relationship with Nord's partner, which is 𝐂𝐤𝐿𝐿. For those that are currently going to be taking a holiday, which I'm going to be in this next week or so, this will be the perfect app if you want to keep up to date with what is happening in the UK and around the world. It means it's an affordable eSIM for data travel, international travel. It allows you to go away wherever you are around the world, have Saley in the App Store, plug it into your phone, and it means that you can just simply have data like that as opposed to having to buy data from your phone wherever you are across the world. You can use the code LWS at checkout to get 50% off your first purchase. I'm going to hand back if I can to Jamie, because we do know that, let's be honest, whilst we do need players coming in, there's a lot of rumours right now about players going out. JR, hand back to you.
Yeah, so one of the players that is being strongly linked with a move away is Cristian Romero, our vice captain. Played a very important role in the Europa League win. Of course, as I said, was the captain in that game. One man of the match. Now, his injury record this year was obviously quite disappointing. I think he missed just over 20 matches in total. He's been linked with a move to Atletico Madrid. I know Diego Simeone seems to be completely obsessed with bringing, obviously, a fellow countryman with him to the Metropolitano. Is Cristian Romero a player that you feel his future might be lying away from Tottenham this summer?
It will take a big bid for that to happen. I think some of the interest from Atletico is obviously genuine. I think it's been around for a while. It's no secret. But my understanding of that situation is that the amount of money that Atletico have so far intimated that they'll be willing to spend on Romero, well, I don't think it'd even touch the sides, to be honest. So there would need to be a negotiation there, and listen, I'd imagine that out of all the players that Thomas Frank would want to keep hold of in his squad, I think Romero would be one of those towards the top of the list, just because of the leadership that he brings. You know, when you do appoint a new manager, there is always going to be bumps in the road with regards to adapting to what you want, how you want your team to play, and to implement the philosophy and the style that you want to play. When you have those bumps in the road, you need leaders in the team just to settle things down. So to lose Romero, who is, I know obviously Heung-min Son is currently club captain, right? But this, but Romero is de facto the sort of the leader on the field. You can just see that from whenever
we saw the final, Sam. We saw in the final way he took the players over in the same point where Man United were huddling. You know, and to be fair, I think Romero, let you come back on this, Sam. I think he was formidable in that final. I think he won Tottenham that final. Just the way he managed the game, right? He was superb.
I thought he was brilliant. I was there watching him, and I was texting a colleague actually who's a Tottenham fan who was in the Tottenham end in Bilbao, and he was I can't remember who he was pinpointing, but I was like, you're absolutely wrong. Like, Romero is hands down the best player on the park. Like, you know, it's not even a contest.
Rattled Maguire, absolutely rattled Maguire, didn't he? Rattled Maguire in that game. Yeah,
he did. And so to get back to your question, you know, I totally understand why Tottenham are saying it's, you know, 70. I think it's 70 million quid, you know, to get him out, because he's that important. He's that important to that team, and you'd have to remind me of what his contractual situation is.
He's got 2 years left.
He's got two, so there is a level of jeopardy there for Tottenham, because if he didn't have 2 years left, I'd imagine that price would be even higher. It would be, you know, you'd be touching 90 million quid. I genuinely think he's that good, and he's definitely a player that Tottenham will not want to sell. And Thomas Frank will want to keep hold of as he looks to implement what he needs to implement, because as I said, you need those type of figures in your team when you're trying to implement change.
I mean, the other thing with Romero, I know we've discussed him a lot on here, and whether he should, we should accept that offer from Atletico Madrid, and maybe, you know, if he does want to leave. But I can't think of many players that Spurs have had, especially in recent times, that have just got that experience and that know-how to win. Because, you know, you go and look at his list of honours that he's won. it's incredible. You know, he's won he has won everything at an international level. He's played a massive part in that. Lionel Messi talked him up as one of the best defenders in the world. So for me, it would be, you know, even if he does have that contract situation, you said, where yes, it is still 2 years, but there is that jeopardy. But regardless, I just think you're never going to replace a player of that quality, and you're not going to be able to replace a player with that experience and know how to win.
How hard is it, Sam? Gosh, Sam, how hard is it now, though? The fact, the fact that Simeone's gone public now and said that he likes the player. What do you make of that? That's surely not right, is it? I mean, the fact that he's gone public and said that now. You know, Romero can quite easily shut this down, can't he? Let's be honest about it. You know, whenever he does an interview, they're fairly explosive ones. The thing is, if Romero wants to, he can come back day one of pre-season and say, Tottenham's where I want to be. You know, that would immediately kill any rumours. That would kill us talking about it. That's, I think, you know, I'd like to think we're going to find out fairly quickly, Sam, won't we, what's going to happen? Because Romero is the kind of person he is. We'll know very quickly whether he wants to stay or wants to move. Do you think? Can you gauge that as well?
I think we know why Simeone has done what he's done. He's putting the pressure on. He's putting the pressure on Tottenham. So look, I want the player. I'm sure Simeone will be sure, having said what he said, and I don't know this for definite, but you'd be pretty sure that he would have had. He's had some indication that Romero would want to come. Otherwise, he wouldn't say it. Simple as that. So, yeah, when you paint that picture, I guess it's not a picture that Tottenham fans will want to look at. But at the end of the day, he's still a player who's got 2 years left on his contract. He may want to go, but it depends on how much Atletico Madrid are willing to pay.
Yeah,
and it's a negotiation. Look, to bring things closer to home, it's exactly the same scenario, I guess, as the Mark Guehi one and Newcastle last season, if you remember that, and that saga. And you know, I think maybe at the time Mark Guehi would have been open to going to Newcastle, but Newcastle just didn't meet the valuation, and that's why you know it didn't happen. It hasn't happened, and yeah, that situation will apply to this as well, because Romero might want to go to Atletico Madrid. He probably does want to go to Atletico Madrid, but you know, if the buying club doesn't meet the terms of the selling club, then the deal's not possible. It's not going to happen.
You know, I've got to be careful what I say, because I don't want to misinterpret or misguide anyone what I'm going to say here. I'm not saying Romero is this type of player, but when I look at Mark Guehi as an individual, he just looks like a very kind of will just get his head down and carry on. And
yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm not saying Romero won't do that, because just to be clear, Romero hasn't ever, to my knowledge, ever refused to train. I know there's kind of that situation around the fact that every time an international break comes up, he looks like he can't wait to get away. But what he has made clear, I think, is his love for Tottenham, not for the ownership, for Tottenham. You know, he's always spoke about Tottenham being a beautiful football club. He's always spoken about the club in a really good light. So I think, for me personally, that you don't want to let your best players go, and you certainly don't want to lose your best players when a new manager does come through the door, because I'd worry, Sam, what that message sends to the rest of the dressing room. You know, for someone that's been around football for a very, very long time, and Jay's going to ask you about Sonny in a second as well, what message does that send if we're going to sell Romero to Thomas Frank, to the squad? You know, we're looking to build something here, right? I mean, that will be my worry if we're looking to, in the end, sell him and we let him go this summer. But the key, again, is whether he wants to be here, right, Sam? I suppose that is, again, a very key point.
It is an important point about his willingness to stay. That is a very important point, obviously. But I will just go back to my original sort of how will it play out? Say if Tottenham don't agree a deal with Atletico Madrid, for example, and it doesn't, there isn't they don't strike a club to club agreement. Even though we kind of think that maybe Romero may want to go to Madrid, what's he going to do what's he going to do if the clubs can't strike a deal? Is he going to throw away a whole season of his career in a World Cup year? Is he going to do that? I'm not sure he is. But then obviously you do. In saying that, you do risk having a very unhappy player at your club, and one that is highly influential at the football club. And depending on the sort of character he is, and we don't know, and you've already said it, Ricky, but those kind of figures at football clubs, as I've just said, are highly influential, and people listen to what they have to say. So if you've got someone on board of that stature who is disaffected, what you need to weigh up is whether that is conducive to sort of nurturing or growing the kind of culture that Thomas Frank wants to cultivate.
Yeah, I think with Romero, I still think there's plenty to be excited about for next season. As you said, I think that's a great point about the World Cup year. I mean, for him, that's going to be so important trying to defend that title. So he'll be well up for that. Of course, it's Champions League football. I think could fit really well into Thomas Frank's system as well. So, as I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that situation. The other situation, we spoke about our vice captain there, our captain, Son Heung-min. He is being linked pretty strongly with a move away. I think he's just signed a 1-year extension, or he signed it back in January. So his contract now runs until 2026. He's been linked with MLS clubs, Saudi clubs, I think clubs in Germany as well. And obviously we don't kind of know how he actually feels about a move to clubs like that. We did have Matt Law on last week, and he was saying that the sense from the dressing room and I think staff was that Son was saying his goodbyes at the club. It would just be interesting to get your take, Sammy, on kind of where you think Son Heung-min's future lies.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that he maybe goes to he leaves Tottenham potentially to Saudi by the close of the transfer window. Whether that happens prior to the tour, the pre-season tour, I'm not sure. I think there would be certainly an obligation for Tottenham to have Son in situ on the flight to Korea, given his standing back in his homeland and some of the kind of activation events that he will be front and center of there. It's an extremely lucrative trip that for Arsenal, for Tottenham, it always has been. So, but not to have your poster boy there, I think would there be some implications for that? So, if he was to go, I suspect it will be after that. It will be after that trip. But I'm hearing that there is a significant chance that he leaves, potentially to Saudi.
Okay, well, Frank, it's not easy. I mean, is it for him? He comes in the job, and similar to Ange in a way, well, I say the star player. I mean, it's all due respect to Sonny. I think there's a wide recognition amongst Spurs fans that maybe the best days of Son are behind him. And I think what is really important, I think, is that I said this before on another couple of shows, that I want to see Sonny leave the club on a high. I don't want to remember Sonny for, again, another season where if Tottenham would have finished mid-table, he doesn't get the GAs that, Sonny, he's capable of. Suddenly, I wouldn't say he's hounded out, because I don't think Tottenham fans would ever do that, but he leaves in a way in which isn't befitting with Sonny, because I think to go out after winning the trophy, a decade at the club, the way he done it, I mean, even when he got the scar on his head for lifting the trophy, there's just something unique and special to have seen Son lift that trophy with Tottenham, a man that has shown such loyalty throughout his time at Spurs. I mean, you'll notice, Sam, at a time when even Kane was linked time after time away, Sonny signed that new contract when Nuno was here, where there was arguments and maybe thoughts that he could have maybe left the club and gone on to better things, but he's always remained absolutely loyal to the football club. Do you think maybe in his mind he'll be thinking to himself, is there a better parting way for me to leave on the back of delivering, Tottenham's first trophy in 17 years, their first one in 40 years, and he's been the captain to oversee both of those things?
it would be the fairy tale ending, wouldn't it? And if I was Heung-min Son, I would think long and hard about that. I would definitely think long and hard about going out in style. And if he was to go out now, he would certainly be doing that. That picture that has just come up there, that will be the abiding memory of Heung-min Son if he does exit this summer. It should be anyway. Even if he goes out next season when his contract expires, you'd hope that if the season isn't as successful personally for Heung-min Son next season, mate, if he doesn't play as often as he would like, you would hope that Tottenham fans will always remember him for that. And I think you probably will, right? Regardless of how next season goes, if he's still at the club. But I do understand, and I do think that there are several people at Tottenham, figures at Tottenham, who expect him to have played his last game or last senior game of football for Tottenham. And obviously the proof will be in the pudding there. And again, it will be a negotiation for Daniel Levy and to appoint Vinay Venkatesham to solve. But I think if Heung-min Son was to turn around to Daniel Levy and say, look, I want to take this move, I think he's got enough credit in the bank with Daniel Levy that Daniel Levy will not be the ruthless businessman that we know he can be when it comes to Heung-min Son. And I think he will maybe perhaps lower his demands if Heung-min Son turns around and says, look, I quite fancy this deal in Saudi. Can you let me go?
Do you think there's any chance on Thomas Frank's behalf that he might want to keep Sonny at the club, or might he looked at Sonny last season and thought maybe it is best if he does go part ways?
I don't know. I've not heard anything on that. And but if you look at it logically, and this kind of high energy game that Thomas Frank likes to implement at the age of 32, is it 33?
Yeah, 32.
Sonny,
yeah.
32.
Yeah.
Is he going to be as relentless down that flank, up and down, as Thomas Frank would like? I'm not sure if he's still got that physicality.
Yeah.
I'm sure he would do on a sort of maybe like a match to match basis, but can he do that three games in a week? It's tough.
No.
For someone at that age. So maybe, I don't know this, but I'm just kind of I'm trying to take an educated guess here that if, given we know how Thomas Frank's teams like to play, you wouldn't necessarily put Heung-min Son on one of the flanks.
Another player as well that could potentially leave and has been linked. Another one linked with Saudi. Now, he has said in the past he wasn't keen on that, and that's Richarlison. Did a big role. I thought he was fantastic in that Europa League final. I mean, you mentioned there about Sonny maybe not working up and down the flank. One player, as I said, that really did that in the final was Richarlison. I mean, obviously, there's been real mixed feelings around his time at Spurs. Obviously, we spent a lot of money on him. I think it's 50 million plus 10 in add-ons. Is he another player that might leave Spurs this summer?
I haven't heard anything in particular and specific about Richarlison. He seems to be linked with a move away from sort of Tottenham ever since he joined. Even following that first season, it was he might go the season after, but he's always hung around. What I can add to that question though is that I do know that he the reason he hasn't been taken by Saudi in the past is because he wants to play top level football, and the riches are vast over in the Middle East, but he's already sort of paid handsomely, and I think he wants to play competitive football. I think he wants to be in a club in a team competing at the very highest end of European football, and that's the reason he went to Tottenham from Everton. He wanted that. He wanted to experience that. You know, next season he's going to have the opportunity again to sort of to play in the Champions League. So, if he does want to hold on again and he doesn't want to go, then I would fully understand it.
Well, it's a World Cup year as well, isn't it, with Brazil? So he'll be wanting to impress on that front.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, again, it just feels like I said, we touched upon that point earlier, Sam. Maybe the reason why there hasn't been, huge amount of movement so far is that Frank needs to come in the door and see what he wants to do with certain players. The thing is, it does feel like Richarlison maybe under Frank, and this might upset if you want to say this. I don't know. I mean, he's a willing worker, and I feel like Frank would maybe really appreciate that. But I think the problem with Richarlison is that lack of fitness that's really been his bugbear, because his actual return of goals to game ratio isn't that terrible. I think he's got a fairly good record when it comes to scoring goals in games played, but it is just that availability. And again, from being around football, availability sometimes is the best ability of a player, right? And I think that's been one of the biggest heart with frustration of Richarlison, just haven't been able to keep him fit. But I do honestly think that Frank will like the player, and that's why I wonder again, certain players that are on the periphery. I think there was a feeling around going at the back end of last season that one of Bissouma or Bentancur would go. And I know there were kind of tentative talks, Sam, around Bentancur signing a new contract. That seems to have gone quiet at the moment. Do you think it's a case that Frank will just want to come in, assess both him and Bissouma in pre-season and work out what he wants to do? Because you said earlier that central midfield is an area they'd like to strengthen. They've got Archie Gray there. They've got Lucas Bergvall there. They've got Pat Matassar there. So a lot of players in that area, right? I mean, how do you see that working out?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Bissouma or Bentancur do go. If Bentancur can't agree a new deal, those talks are ongoing, as I understand it. They started earlier this year, I think around maybe February, March time. Obviously, there's been no agreement yet, but I think that's an area that's a deal that Tottenham, certainly under Ange Postecoglou, wanted to do. This was maybe about 4 or 5 weeks ago. I was led to believe that Yves Bissouma. This was just like the week after the final. Yves Bissouma would have been a player that they would listen to offers for. But again, the change in manager could change everything. And Thomas Frank could look at Yves Bissouma and think, well, I could really do with his energy and his kind of high octane style, and those legs in the middle of the park. And all of a sudden, you've got a player who looked like he would be on his way out of the club. It suddenly becomes important. I think the prime example of that, away from Tottenham last season, is Ryan Gravenberch at Liverpool, for example.
Yeah,
didn't have a look in towards the end of under Jurgen Klopp, and then Arne Slot spots something in him, and he's integral to a team that runs away with the title. And that's I'm not saying that's going to happen to Bissouma, but the manager may spot something in him and say, actually, I want to give him a shot.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I mean, look, I know conscious of time, Sam. I think one of the things that I'm keen to ask you about, and we've got young players that they might be coming through the door, but I want to ask you about the situation they've got around this kind of club train situation. And there's been tentative links that they might have to dip back in the market and maybe go and look at some previous players they've had at the club, the likes of Kyle Walker-Peters, Dennis Sirkin. I mean, I think these are tentative links at the moment. Have you heard anything about them looking at this club train situation being a massive concern? I think it's one of the areas that has been brought to a lot of our attention as fans, that don't be surprised if the club would have to bring back a former player just to ease their concern over this situation. Have you heard anything, Sam, about having to bring back maybe a former player to ease that potential concern?
I've not that specifically, but I have heard the rumor. I say rumor. I have heard of an interest in Kyle Walker-Peters. He's a free transfer, right?
He would be, I think. Yes, I think he would be a free transfer.
Yeah, he's left, hasn't he? His contract's up at Southampton. So, I think, from what I understand, he is a player that I think would would, that Tottenham have an interest in, but Kyle Walker-Peters will have a lot of interest because he's available for nothing, and there are there will be. I'd imagine there will be a lot of clubs who are monitoring him, thinking that they can. He's a good bit of business because he's free.
Sorry. Obviously, we just said there we've got the homegrown issue, so logically it'll be right to ask you about a player who's from the Netherlands. 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐵 is a player that is being offered around at the moment. Of course, RB Leipzig had a really poor season. They didn't qualify for Europe at all. So, stars like 𝐤𝐤𝐤 and I think Benjamin Sesko going to be keen to kind of maybe get out. Is 𝐤𝐤𝐤 a player that might come into the that frame at Tottenham? Of course, another really top attacker, someone that did, showed what he can do against England in the Euros and the semi-finals back in 2024. Is that a player of interest to Spurs at all?
Look, I've not heard that specifically, but what I would say about 𝐤𝐤𝐤 is that I agree. I think he's a player of high talent, but he's been linked with Premier League clubs for probably the past 2 years, and it just seems to me that no clubs have at the moment bitten the bullet and taken a chance on him. There will be a reason for that. Whether it's price, whether it's talent, I don't know, but I just wonder if he was going to join a top Premier League club, whether that would have happened by now.
And I think also, just Sam, I got you here. I think Jamie will ask you about one of the younger prospects that we're hoping to sign in terms of a player that has been on Spurs' radar, it feels, over the last few weeks. But I want to ask you about one that looks like incoming, maybe imminently, but we're yet to have confirmation of that. And that is Kota Takai, young central Japanese defender. Would be good to know your thoughts on that. And I think there's been suggestions that he actually would go straight into Spurs' pre-season squad and would be someone they view as being around the first team. Clearly a player they must have looked at and identified. I mean, quite interestingly, you would have argued that maybe this would have been a player you would imagine that would have came in under Ange's tenure because he's from the J League. Obviously, where Ange would have known the league very, very well, having coached there, managed there. What do you gauge that for you in terms of Kota Takai, young player? We don't know too much about him, but there seems to be some decent reports out of Japan that he could be a real promising prospect, which I know, can I just say to qualify, I know a lot of Tottenham fans out there are maybe sick of me or sick of us talking about prospects and future young generational talent. I know everyone wants proven players that we've touched upon and there to be a high caliber ceiling of what's coming through. But at the same time, we also don't want to miss out on players that could have a direct impact on the first team, like maybe Takai could do.
Yeah. This came out of the blue, didn't it? Was it last week or the week before? Maybe the week before. For 5 million, the reports I've had back about him, albeit very limited, have been very promising. He sounds like he's got bags and bags of talent. He sounds like he's a very, very good prospect. And for 5 million euros, I think it was. It's obviously in relative terms, it's a drop in the ocean, really, for a club the size of Tottenham. I think my understanding is that he will go straight into the first team squad, and I think he will arrive in time for the start of pre-season training. So he should arrive in the next few days into London, ready to train with Tottenham. So it will be exciting to see how he develops and how he is utilised next season. The skeptic in me will say that this is also a good commercial move for Tottenham. Potentially, if Son does go, and Kota does turn into the player that everyone hopes he's going to be, there might be big commercial value in that lucrative market that Tottenham have kind of got pretty well cornered at the moment because of Heung-min Son. He's vastly popular over there. But I'm not saying he's just a commercial commodity. I think there is, as I say, I've heard very good things about his footballing ability. So, if he can develop in the way that Tottenham believe he can on the pitch, then invariably you could get the best of both worlds there.
Another young defender coming in is Luka Vuskovic. I really wanted to ask about him because he seems like a massive talent. I don't know how much you know about how highly he's rated at Spurs, because they signed him 2 years ago now for, I think it was £12 million, beat off competition from Manchester City. Is that a player as well that might get a look in at Spurs? And I know he's been linked with another loan move away, but surely Frank's going to need options at central defence if we know he can play at 3 at the back as well.
Yeah, no, I've heard the reports about this guy, and he's very Luka Vuskovic. He's very highly rated, isn't he, across European circles. You'd imagine that he would want to have a look at him before deciding whether he needs another loan or not. It's almost like I'd compare that situation to the William Saliba one at Tottenham. At Arsenal, at Tottenham, where he was loaned out, I think 2 or 3 seasons on the bounce, and you were never sure whether Mikel Arteta really fancied him, because why would you loan him out if you really did? But there was always a plan for Saliba, and obviously we know now that plan has worked. They've executed that plan pretty well. How that develops, well, I think we will know in the next 4 to 5 weeks. I think the manager will have a look at him and thinks if he's ready to be part of the squad, then he'll stay. If they think they'll benefit from another loan, and he may go. But I think Saliba is an example of someone who it was a sink or swim situation for William Saliba, and he obviously swam. So maybe Vuskovic does need that chance just to prove that he can do it, and once he's had that opportunity, it's up to him to take it.
Yeah, well, he's had 68 appearances already at senior level, so very impressive. Made his Croatian debut, so I think that William Saliba example is a great comparison, and we saw last year the impact that Bergvall had. Obviously, a young player coming in from a different league, so fingers crossed with him. One more player that we wanted to ask about was the young Leeds United striker who seems to be set to join Spurs, Oliver Boast. I said he's 16 years old. Spurs seem like they've agreed a 7-figure deal for him. I think he's a player who's probably going to be one for the academy. Is that right?
Yeah, that he will be an academy player. I cannot see at this age, during a period of transition, which it will be, certainly in the short term for Tottenham, that he will have a say in the first team immediately. Maybe depending on how he develops in the academy, opportunities down the road. Maybe towards the end of this season or maybe next, but I can't see someone of that age. I can't confess that I know too much about him, but he at 16 it would be a tall order in a manager's first season.
Yeah, I've got to say, Sam, we grabbed you over the last 6-7 years where we have Spurs at different points in the window. They've either done quite a lot of business. I think there's been a time we've got you when they've actually done a lot of business. There's been times they've done barely anything. You'll probably gauge, if you see the mood from a Spurs social media perspective, that there's a real feeling around the fans. I can't speak for all of them. I can only speak for what I see. The general feeling is that there needs to be, as we said, a degree of experience that comes through the squad this summer to give the club the best possible chance to fight on all 4 fronts and give Thomas Frank the best possible opportunity to succeed. This is probably a bit of a hospital question I'm going to ask you, or a hospital ball pass to ask you. Do you think when that window does shut, Tottenham will be invariably in a stronger position and be in a position to give Thomas Frank the best possible chance to have success next season? I would love to know in your mind what you feel success would be for Tottenham, because they obviously sacked the manager that got them a European trophy. But again, to balance that, they did finish 17th in the Premier League, which I know for many out there, wasn't seen as acceptable. So what is success for Tottenham? What would the window look like for success for Frank, I guess, in terms of getting those right quality players for next season?
Look, Tottenham are trying to strengthen. You know, they are trying to strengthen the squad. I think we've seen that with, certainly with the Kudus interest for sure. But like, I don't think, or my understanding is there aren't mass sums of money to spend this summer. That's not to say that the club's in a poor financial situation, and far from it. We know that they're not. But I just think in terms of having cash available at the moment to spend on new players, I don't think there is necessarily the levels of cash that that's available to sort of take the team to a different level just from transfers and signings alone. So they've got to be cute in how they operate. But what they do have now is a manager, and that this is no disrespect to Ange Postecoglou, but they've got a manager now who has a sort of a clear and defined way of playing, but will also have that balance between maybe defense and attack that I think a lot of Tottenham supporters would they'd admit that was maybe a little bit lacking, certainly in that final season and under Ange Postecoglou. And I think that will go a long way towards righting some of the wrongs. But I still think you've got a very capable squad. That's far better than finishing in 17th position. If it's all harnessed in the right way. And obviously Ange Postecoglou was out on record saying he put all his eggs into the Europa League basket, and it came off for him. It came off for him. He will forever go down in the club's folklore as the manager that ended that long running trophy drought. But what I think a club the size of Tottenham needs to compete on multi fronts, and that will be the target for Thomas Frank this season. Is to certainly improve on their league position. But obviously they will do that. If they can be pushing top 5, top 6 next season, given the Premier League season that has just gone before, I think that would be a mark of a progressive season for sure.
I think, yeah, again, it's tricky at the moment because I know a lot of people out there will suggest that we need to improve the squad to get there. But I think, I think we can see across this window, it's maybe going to be a challenging one, but we've talked about it tonight. There's so many variables up in the air, like Sam was at the moment, from Son to Romero to what they're going to do in the market when it comes to the different areas, from centre midfield to wing position to the left-hand side of the fence. It does for us a lot of moving parts right now, Jay. Would you agree? Again, I look at the mood out there with fans. I know a lot of fans feel like they've been here before, right? Because they've seen 24, 25 years under Renick, and it's hard to ever say that you've come out of a window feeling that we've really made such such strides where we're going to really significantly push on. Is that fair?
No, I think you're right. And the frustrating thing for me at the moment is that we are in such a good position. I mean, as you said, there might be an understanding given the situation that we've just changed managers and etc. But it's the fact that we're in such a good position at the moment to really build on. We've got Champions League football. We've just won a trophy. We've obviously got a really good manager in as well, who should be able to, great communicator, great coach as well. So yeah, as you said, we've seen it plenty of times in the past where Levy hasn't kicked us on. So I guess that's probably where the most frustration comes from. But as I said, kind of at this point, from my point of view, there's not too many concerns that we haven't done a great deal, but we'll see. As I said, many times before, we've been left a little bit short by the owners.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, it's always a pleasure having you on. We're going to see you in January, so people will never remember what you're going to say from here when I ask you this question. Where do you think Spurs will finish next season?
I think they'll finish in the top 6.
Okay.
I think Frank's an excellent manager. Thomas Frank's an excellent manager, and I think that, as I just said, the squad that you have is a very capable one.
Yeah.
That it needs some balance in the team, and it needs harnessing, and the culture that he will nurture there, Thomas Frank, will be one of inclusivity and togetherness, and I think he'll get everyone singing off the same hymn sheet, and I think I think Tottenham will be fine. I think Tottenham will be fine under Thomas Frank. He's a good manager, really good manager.
Sam, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. I know you're busy everywhere, so we always appreciate you fitting us in. Tell us what's going on in the world of Sami Mokbel, because since you've last joined us, there's been a change in where you've been. You're over at the BBC.
Yes, I've spent 13 really happy years at the Daily Mail, and in many ways, I'm still a newspaper sort of journalist at heart, but it's a different challenge at the BBC. It's a multi, certainly football journalism is heading in a different direction. It's multi-platform. It's doing stuff like this. It's no longer just the written word. It's you're doing videos and on the radio. You're doing bits of on air stuff on TV, and there's so many different platforms now to sort of present your information and present your news, and it's I sound like an old man, like getting used to all these things, and I feel like an old man getting used to sort of doing those selfie videos and stuff like that. But I'm gonna throw myself into it, mate.
I'll make you laugh. I've got one of my cousins now to put us on TikTok. I couldn't even tell you what a TikTok was before he told me. Now we're on TikTok. Like, I know what's going on over there. I'm just trying to keep up over here.
You got to move with the times, mate.
We've got to move with the times. Sam, where can we find the wonderful work you do? Because I say predominantly, I know you do a lot on the Spurs beat, but it's not the Spurs you're covering. I know throughout the summer you'll be covering a lot of football clubs. So tell us how they can find you.
I will. Well, I will post most of my stories on my X feed, which is at Sami Mokbel _ BBC, and obviously I'm sure everyone knows what the BBC website. I'm sure it should be your daily go-to for your news, but if it's not, www.bbc.co.uk.
Lovely. I know many fans probably outside Spurs know that to be their go-to. Right now for us, we're just trying to think of when we'll be going there to talk about transfers. But hopefully, hopefully now is a great time to divert everybody over there, because there'll be stuff happening. I want to say a massive thank you, Sam. You've been a star. We look forward to seeing you back with us in the new year, where hopefully Spurs are riding high and doing well, and we're in a good position going into January. I'm sure, Jay, you agree. It's one of those times right now where I know fans are frustrated because of the lack of movement, but at the same time, I suppose maybe the caliber of players we've been within this window, they've not all been youngsters like Sam has touched upon. There's been some fairly experienced players there. And I do think if we get to the end of the window and we have brought in 2 or 3 of, dare I say, 4, maybe I'm going overboard here, Jay, of some ready-made Premier League proven experienced players, we'll be feeling quite confident going to next season. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we saw last season, we did bring in a lot of youngsters, and maybe as many of them will turn up to be very good. And obviously Bergvall was very good last season. We do need that experience now. Sami said about the balance of the squad and getting that right. We obviously need to get the balance of getting some experience in now. For me, Kudus would be an outstanding sign if we can get it. If we can somehow go back in for EZE as well, obviously we don't know what's going to happen with that at the moment. Would be amazing. But that sort of caliber player would be fantastic, and hopefully we can get some more of those type of players.
Agree. Well, listen, thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you so much, Sami. I have to say, you guys out there, I'm taking a bit of an enforced break over the next few weeks. I'm off for a couple of weeks, which means it's all going to go crazy. It's all going to go chaotic, but we are going to have you covered every step of the way. But it won't be me being here. I want to say a massive thank you to the wonderful Jamie Brown for the Daily Hotspur, the superb Sami Mokbel from the BBC. Guys, we've been the last one on Spurs. Thanks to over nearly 10,000 of you that are watching the show live. Keep safe, keep well. We'll be back with you before you know it. And as always,